to you.
Right.
And enable the speaker.
Okay.
you very much. Good evening and welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this evening on Wednesday the 12th of January. My name is Councillor Ian Picker and I'm Chairman of this committee. I'm joined this evening by Richard Holt, our Development and Enforcement Manager, Sarah Chapman, our Legal and Governance Manager, and I'd also like to welcome to Planning Committee our new Chief Officer for Growth and Investment, Nicola Smith. The meeting this evening is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel, and during the meeting, if you wish to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening, so if the fire alarm does sound, could I ask you to make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall, and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will give instructions on when it's safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of December 2021. Could I ask members to show their hands if they're happy for me to sign those? Thank you very much. The second item is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence, Democratic Services?
One apology for tonight's meeting from Councillor McQueen, no substitute. Thank
you very much. The third item is declarations of interest. To receive declarations of interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for members under A, non-pecuniary interests. Councillor Eccleston. Thank you. Anything under item B, pecuniary interests? And finally under C, notice under section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. Excellent. So moving on to the applications for consideration this evening. I'll just run through the way we deal with each item. So the first thing is that the planning officer will speak first and present the application, and then the representatives for the objectors, the applicants, and finally the ward councillor will be invited to speak. After each speaker, committee members will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the speaker. Any ward member or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process will be asked to leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations. Finally, members of the committee will go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will be made and voted on. The rules for public speaking are that speakers have 3 minutes to make their presentation. They will be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then a further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt and no additional time will be permitted. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have previously put to us for the benefit of the committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material planning considerations only, and non-planning issues will be disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. introduce late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report. Finally, no visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or members will be allowed, and no members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation has been given. So moving on to the applications this evening tonight. The first one is R21/0673 Moat Farm Drive. Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that the application has been withdrawn by the applicant and therefore will no longer be discussed at this committee.
Thank you. So we then move on to R21/0976 9 Cambridge Street, Rugby, and the officer to present is Lucy Davidson.
This is application R21/0976 at 9 Cambridge Street. The application that has been submitted to the local planning authority for consideration is for the change of use of the dwelling from use class C4, which is an HMO which does not require any further planning permission, to a sui generis use of a large house of multiple occupation with 7 bedrooms. And therefore, moving to a sui generis use requires the permission of the local planning authority. These are some site photographs from a previous visit to the site. The photograph which shows a red car, it is the 2-storey white rendered building, is 9 Cambridge Street, with the darker door with the low-level brick wall to the front with bay window and off-road bin storage that's shown there. The other photographs that are provided in this presentation are of the other dwellings within Cambridge Street to provide context of the site. For reference, these are the floor plans that were submitted with the application that outline the 7 bedrooms within the property. The elevations of the property, there is no alterations proposed under the application. It is solely for the change of use. Under the principle of development, 9 Cambridge Street is located within Rugby Town in terms of policy GP1 and GP2 of the local plan. This is considered the most sustainable location within the borough, and therefore the application complies with these policies in the local plan. In terms of character and design, as I've previously stated, there's no alterations proposed to the property, and there is already in existence off-road bike and bin storage at the property. Under neighbouring amenity, the property in the change of use from use class C4 to sui generis remains within a residential function. It's providing further consent for additional single persons within the property. Noise and disturbance was raised as an objection within the representations provided for the application. These were consulted on with both our environmental health team within Rugby Borough Council and the private sector housing team who are responsible of the HMO licence at the property. They have raised no objections or provided me with any other information regarding the site other than that outlined within the report. In terms of the HMO licence that covers the property, this does allow up to 10 people. This is in line with the separate HMO standards, not within the planning regulations. So this planning application is solely for 7 residents at the property. Another matter raised both by the local residents and considered under the application is that of highway safety. Warwickshire County Council Highways Department were consulted on the application and have no objection. In terms of the local plan policies, each HMO application is considered on its own merits. The application site is within the high access zone as outlined in the local plan and also is therefore close to both bus and train services. There was concerns regarding the number of vehicles that could be associated and also the matter regarding potential residence permit parking. This is dealt with specifically by the County Council, not ourselves at the local planning authority. However, I would just make members aware that whether the property is an HMO or a single household dwelling, it would, if residence permit parking was to be introduced, the same amount of permits would be available, whether it was this current C4 or as an HMO use. Another matter that was also considered due to the location of the property is air quality, and following responses to the application, it is considered that the informative included on the decision notice covers the policy that we have in terms of this matter. Therefore, the recommendation put to the councillors this evening is that the application complies with the local plan policies in the NPPF and is recommended for approval subject to the conditions and informatives outlined in the draft decision notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers on this item this evening, so we will come first to the objector, and that is Mr. Andrew Jacobs. Mr. Jacobs, you have 3 minutes. The floor is yours.
It's on, right. This is accessible. I'm allowed to present this. You've all got copies of this email. Yep.
We received your email, yes.
Okay. So I won't waste 3 minutes going through every single point, but I'll draw attention to this. One of your main criteria is impact on neighbours. There's a big impact on the neighbours. Myself, and the lady sat up here. Now, that lovely speech you just gave about air quality and parking is nonsensical. Okay, I live there, I've lived there for 9 years, and there is a huge impact with smells of waste, all detailed in here. Okay, parking is an absolute farce. It's a nightmare. Smells of drugs, rubbish, you know, to a point whereby it's reported as a gas leak, but it isn't a gas leak. Now, either this committee is going to take these things seriously, or we're just doing a paper exercise here. I very much hope you've got some credibility and you look into these details, because they are factual. And to say that things have not been reported is completely erroneous. So if it's a stuffy meeting just designed to tick boxes, I'm not interested. If it's up for debate to make sure that you actually represent local people like me and others in that area, then let's have a discussion, a proper one. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs. Have any members of the committee got any questions for Mr. Jacobs? Councillor Mrs. Brown?
Thanks. Good evening, Mr. Jacobs. You mentioned that you'd already put in complaints about the situation from the House as it exists at the moment. Can you just confirm that for me? Because I couldn't see anything on the documentation that we had that referred to previous complaints about it.
I think your policy says in the last 12 months, doesn't it?
Can an officer confirm that, please?
It does. Okay, I'll answer the question. I've been in correspondence with, not just, I have to say, about this particular premises. Okay, I've reported incidents to the landlord, thinking I was doing the right thing by saying, listen, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of rubbish, I can smell drugs, there's parties in the back garden. I've gone in and told them to shut up. There's cars parked outside at 11 o'clock at night with the radios blaring that I've gone out to and told them to bugger off. Okay, but as a general theme, I'm the person with Ellie and others in the street that want to live in a nice area. So I'm talking to the police, I'm talking to the Safe Neighbourhoods Committee, I've set up the Residents Parking Committee. We're spending our own time, our own money, trying to get this place nicer. Okay, so all this stuff about bin storage and bicycle storage, absolute nonsense. The people that live in that house are transient. They will be there from, I don't know, a month or 3 or 6, and then they leave and are replaced with other people. Okay, so it's absolutely nonsensical. Nobody is going to cycle from Cambridge Street all the way to the Braille Freight Terminal for a job in a warehouse, let's say. And residents parking, well, there isn't any. I very much hope there will be soon. How does that work if you've got 7 or is it 10 people in the house? Each could have a car, but you're allowed 3 tickets and a visitor. How does that work practically? So I, as I put in my email, work for another council, nowhere near here, and I'm not going to say whom it is, but I know the challenges they're facing. And I'm yet to attend a meeting like this, but I would hope it would have some credibility, some real world credibility, where people like me are listened to, because that's who this is supposed to serve. And yes, many complaints have been raised.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Any further questions or comments? Richard?
Yeah, just to clarify, following on from, I think, possibly what Mr Jacobs has said and what Councillor Brown was asking, obviously in context of this planning application, then, as members will be aware, there is obviously a public consultation exercise that is undertaken, and we will obviously invite then third-party representations to be made. Obviously, if I'm aware through licensing, there's a different and completely separate complaints process, which is possibly what Mr Jacobs was referring to, and the people who's been in contact with our environmental health people. Obviously, we also then have our own enforcement complaint process, but that will be outside of this application.
Any further questions for Mr Jacobs? Okay. Oh, Councillor Mrs Watson-Merritt.
Thank you, Mr Jacobs. I'm one of your close neighbours. I sympathise with all that you've experienced. How many cars do you park on Cambridge Street? Just your address?
Me, 1.
Yours is one.
One.
And then your representation by way of your email came via number 7 as well. Would you know how many cars they park?
1.
Just one. Fair enough. I know that my road facilitates 2 permits through Warwickshire County Council. So I'm just wondering, because in that letter there was some mention of a 3rd permit. Can we just clarify how that came to be? Because I don't know of any other streets that would be allowed 3 permits per address.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's 3 permits per address and a visitor. So, as you know, if you live in the area, Cambridge Street is used, and again, this is ongoing with various different bodies, local authorities, Warwickshire County Council, Rugby Borough Council. I have evidence that shows I've raised this for about 9 years, and nobody's listening. So I'm now vexed. Okay? There are cars that are left in that street for years. I am not exaggerating. I have picture evidence. I've called the police. Now, I'm not saying that's got any relation to, what is it, number 9? But what I am saying is if you've got 7 or 10 people there and they each have a car, there's absolutely no way that works practically with these rules, and there's no way it works in practice either, because cars are dumped there and they used to go to the station, or people leave their cars there to go on holiday, or various other things. It's the only street that's anywhere around it that if you can't park as a resident, you can't park anywhere. There is literally nowhere to go.
Hence my sympathies. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think that's everything from yourself, so thank you very much for your comments, and we will come to the next speaker. So the next speaker is Mr. Martin Davies, and he's speaking in support of the application this evening. Mr. Davies, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay, I've got Councillor Gillius and then Councillor Mrs Brown.
Just to ask you, regarding tenancy agreements with your tenants, I mean, how much tolerance do you give them when they start to annoy the neighbours? Is it, 3 strikes and out, or out straight away? Can I just come back on that?
You certainly may.
I'm really keen because, you know, I probably ought to declare an interest because my brother has a number of properties in the borough. And, you know, in past years we've had problems with tenants, but you've really got to lay down the law with them from the outset as regards, you know, what will be tolerated, what won't be tolerated. You know, because the key to all this is the neighbours. The neighbours are the ones that need to be kept happy. Those are people that bought their homes and want to live in some sort of tranquility. So it's your job and your boss's job to make sure that always happens.
Okay. So I next have Councillor Mrs Brown, then Councillor Eccleston, and then Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you. Hello, Mr Davis. Can you clarify for me the change that there will be in the number of residents should this go through, these changes go through? I understand there's no change to the fabric of the building, but there must be a change to the number of tenants that there will be.
Sorry, Mr Davis, could I ask you to pop your microphone on, please?
Oh, sorry,
Thanks.
I thought I had. We're licensed for 10. We can never have any more than those. We normally have facility for couples. We normally have 2 couples, but we can't go over the stated licence agreement from the council. Invariably, we don't get many couples. They're mainly single occupancies, so obviously you're normally led by 1 person per room, sometimes couples. But we can't go over 10 in that property because that's what we're licensed for.
Thank you. So there'll be no change in the number of residents. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Lucy Davison here.
Yeah, in terms of the planning and licensing, they are 2 separate permissions. So obviously under the HMO licence, as has been stated, it allows for 10, and that's in regards to the standards and amenities that are outlined separately as an HMO licence. But it is the case that if this application was granted, then in terms of planning, then the property would be restricted to 7. They wouldn't be, if they had any more than that, then it would be a breach of the planning permission, and we could take enforcement in terms of that. So that whilst the HMO licence may allow for more, under the planning permission, it would restrict it to 7.
Councillor Eccleston?
Yeah, I'm actually going to have a question for the officer afterwards as well about sui generis and the difference between that and the HMO licence. Just a question for gentlemen. You say that you're representing the landlord from a maintenance perspective. One of the points raised in the objection is regarding, we've heard it again tonight, dirt, vermin, I think is also mentioned in there. How often do you actually inspect the properties?
Sorry, my button. I get called by Mr. Williams. I probably go around the properties. Well, I was at that property recently because I refitted the bathroom on one of the bathrooms. So I spent nearly a week there myself. I'm probably around the properties, each one of 10, probably once to twice a week. I know I've visited South Street, Manor Road, Cambridge Street, 2 on Claremont and Oxford Street today myself. And I was actually there waiting for the council.
It's conceivable then, if you did identify a vermin or a dirt issue, a trash issue, that you would report that back to the landlord, or would you deal with it directly with the tenant?
I normally deal with it myself.
Councillor Sanderson?
Thank you, Chair. My question is clearly there are 3 authorities involved in that locality. You've got the Borough Council in terms of environmental protection, you've got the planning authority, which is dealing with structure, and you've obviously got the county council, which is dealing with traffic management problems in the area. Now, in terms of traffic management problems, residents have raised the concern of whether there should be resident parking permits or zoning of the area. Would you, as the landlord's representative, support zoning for the area?
100%. I lived on Oxford Street, so yes, I'm well aware of it, and we'd be more than happy. We'd probably end up paying for the permits. Yeah, but no, I'm a local resident, I'm only in the next street. So yes, I do support it because we actually campaign for it ourselves to get it in with the...
I declare an interest. I'm in the next street up from that one, so I do appreciate the traffic problems.
I'm getting the distinct impression that about a third of the committee lives within walking distance of this particular application. Are there any further questions for Mr Davies? Thank you very much. And we will now come to our final speaker for this evening, who is Councillor Sarah Feeney, who is speaking on behalf of Councillor Mrs O'Rourke.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for noting that I am in place of Councillor O'Rourke today. So I'm sure I shan't do as good a job, but I shall try my hardest. Obviously, one of the things Councillor O'Rourke wanted to talk about was actually the huge number of HMOs in Ben. It's one of the areas in the town that has the highest concentration, and the concern is that, yet again, granting more permission just creates more of the problem. And residents are quite rightly concerned about the impact to the area. I have been working with Mr Jacobs and other residents to get the parking scheme in. Warwickshire County Council are currently in the middle of the questionnaire. However, at this point in time, and this is the point we have to deal with as a material concern, you know, Mr Jacobs is quite right. People from Oxford Street have overspill cars over there. People from lower down in Cambridge Street have overspill cars there. And it is very, very difficult. You know, one of the questions asked by elected members was, has it been raised about people, you know, about the police attending the property? I can confirm that a local resident sent pictures of the police attending the property on November the 20th, which Councillor O'Rourke did then pass on to several officers of the council. So it's a well-known fact that there are issues at the property, and the concern of residents very clearly, and our concern is that more people will add to more pressures and more issues. Like I've said, the parking issues are really of a huge concern in the area. It is, as Mr Jacobs quite rightly said, a bit of a park and ride area. It's people dump cars there. Mr Jacobs showed me himself one of the cars that's been parked there for something like 5 years and hasn't moved. You know, so I think we're just adding to the problem, granting the HMO licence at this time, if I'm really honest.
Thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions for Councillor Feeney? Councillor Eccleston.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just for clarity, are we looking at the licence here? Because I didn't think we were. I thought it's already licensed. We're simply looking at changing the terminology around that. Isn't that correct?
That is my understanding, yes, that this is already a HMO.
I'm sorry, I just got the impression from the speaker that we were talking about assessing the number of licences in Ben Ward for HMOs, and this is yet another licence. That wasn't my understanding of the application here.
That is my understanding also. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Again, hello Sarah, hope you're keeping well. In terms of the area, it's long been argued that the area should be properly zoned. Not all residents want resident parking or the extortionate prices that Warwickshire County Council charge. Others prefer one-way systems to also manage the traffic. So it does matter on a street-by-street basis, and it does matter whether there's a majority of residents in favour of such a
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We did have some minor technical issues, but we're now back live, and we're ready to move on to R20/0787, which is Coton Park East, and this is with Joe Orton.
This application seeks outline planning permission for the erection of up to 475 dwellings with land for a primary school and land reserved for either secondary school provision or residential development, with vehicular access off Central Park Drive and emergency vehicle access taken from Newton Lane, along with associated green infrastructure and public open space. The outline application is looking at the principle of development and access only. Access to the development will be taken from Central Park Drive and via the Persimmon development to the south. Prior to the meeting, additional consultation responses were received. 2 responses were received from ward councillors. Councillor Ellis has raised comments in relation to the need for a secondary school to serve Coton, Bourton, Eden Park, Roxbury Heights, Newton and Brownsover. Transport to other schools within the vicinity is difficult using buses, and the crossing at Leicester Road is unsafe for young children. A secondary school must be secured as part of the development. Councillor Robbins has also issued comments in support of the application, but does also have concerns that a secondary school is needed for the development within the area, and says that it's essential that this is secured. Warwickshire County Council, within a letter, set out difficulties of carrying out assessment during the pandemic to establish the need for a secondary school in the north of Rugby. In addition to ward councillor comments, consultation responses were also received in addition from a further 5 members of the public. Those comments stated that a secondary school is needed within this part of Rugby. The road should be adopted. There's concerns over maintenance fees rising, wildlife habitats impacted on the site by the development, a significant loss of green space through Warwickshire due to developments that carried out throughout the borough, issues with the impact of the highway network and lack of buses, along with the fact that it's thought that existing empty dwellings should be utilised within the borough before looking at building new estates. Moving on to the application itself, in front of you can see the indicative site layout which has been submitted by the applicants. So we have the new green open space and connectivity throughout. You've got you can see the Persimmon developments to the south. To the front here we have the land which has been reserved for a primary school, and the land which is in this location and this location up here is reserved for secondary school provision or residential development. Looking at the site photos, we have a picture of the site looking down towards the Persimmon development, which was approved in 2018 and towards the end of last year. A view of the site looking across towards Newton. A shot looking up towards the employment site. And then also a shot towards the access. Excuse me. Moving on to the key issues for the application. In terms of the principle of development, the application is located within the countryside where national policy permits that only where policy allows will development be permitted. In this case, the proposal is considered to be a sustainable location as long as an allocated site within the local plan, as it's situated on the edge of Coton Park and forms part of the Rugby town. It is also considered to be a sustainable location, having appropriate levels of infrastructure and access routes, including public transport. Other matters in relation to character design and impact on residential amenity, these will be addressed at the reserve matters stage, so should members be minded to approve the application. And the matters up for consideration at that point by officers will be the design, scale, massing and landscaping. Moving on to highway safety, a new access is proposed from Central Park Drive along with a new Persimmon development to the south. Warwickshire County Council have confirmed that they have no objections to the proposal, along with the Highways England. The design and access statement submitted with the application confirms that the proposal complies with the local authority's parking requirements. Moving on to the matter of the secondary school, Local Plan Policy DS7 states that 8.5 hectares of land will be reserved for both primary and secondary school permission for a period of 12 to 24 months following the adoption of the local plan. After this time, policy states that the land will be released from the provision for the primary school and residential development. The safeguarding period within the application expired in June 2021, after which the local authority do not have a policy basis in which to safeguard the land. A formal letter was received from Warwickshire County Council informing of the decision-making process with regards to secondary schools and the obstacles it has had during the pandemic, including Ofsted inspections not being able to take place. Through discussions with the agents and the applicants on the application, officers did manage to secure the land going forward on the master plan as still being for secondary school provision or residential development, rather than potentially just risking losing it straight away. This was to allow time for the County Council to work with the applicants with a view to purchasing the site on a commercial basis. In other matters, there are no material adverse impacts for flood risk and drainage, landscaping, ecology, land contamination, archaeology and air quality. Moving on to the planning balance, the proposal is an allocated site within the local plan. The scheme would bring a number of benefits, including additional dwellings and affordable housing to local stock, along with associated short-term economic benefits. Any net loss in biodiversity would be mitigated against in conditions through either the requirement of a contribution to be paid through a Section 106 agreement or for an updated biodiversity impact assessment to come forward as part of the Reserve Matters Plan to try and mitigate against that loss at the later stage when landscaping is looked at in more detail. The proposal would also not have an adverse impact on highway safety. It is therefore recommended that the application is approved subject to conditions, informatives and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sanderson, you were
Yes,
first.
thank you, Chair. I was just going through the conditions and the reasons, and I couldn't see anything there that covered the requirement for the secondary school. Can you tell me why it's not in there as a condition or a reason or any other form of sort of encouragement to the county council to provide that secondary school, which some of us have been arguing for since the beginning of the local plan development process, and clearly has a significant impact upon the locality. In terms of traffic flow, you don't build that school in the north. We get the traffic flow through the central areas of Rugby where the congestion's the highest, and the pupils don't have to go to schools in the west in terms of the new development. Now, forgive me, but that seems like absolute madness for an education authority to work in that way. So it would be good to see something in here that says we do support the building of the school.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. So, excuse me, the issue that officers have in terms of policy DS7 of the local plan, it states that the 8.5 hectares of parcel will be reserved for a period of 12 to 24 months from the date of the local plan adoption. After this time, if the local authority does not require the land for a secondary school, and the land will be released for the provision of a primary school and for residential use. The problems that we have, the only information that we have received to date is the fact that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the work has not been able to be put into place through colleagues within education. So the time unfortunately elapsed within that 2 years where there was no flexibility where we would be able to look at increasing that time because it was set out at the time when the plan was adopted. What officers have done, knowing the concerns and also the requirements of education and speaking to other ward members, we have managed to negotiate that rather than just losing the potential secondary school, it's carrying forward 3 reserve matters if members are minded to approve, clearly stating that the land will be for secondary school use or residential development. This is allowing colleagues within education to be able to negotiate outside of the planning process because the policy requirement has lapsed, to come up with a commercial agreement for that land to come forward as a secondary school option.
Which condition are we talking about?
Through you, Chair, it would be within the plans condition where it's stated, where we've got the master plan which will be approved, including the...
Which condition?
I believe it's condition 3. I'll just double check.
Right, it doesn't say school on there, does it? It says landscape appearance, scale, layouts.
Apologies.
Or it doesn't say educational needs, for example.
Apologies, let me just find the bit, sorry.
Yeah, through you, Chair, it's condition 5 is referring to proposed illustrative master plan, and condition 6, if that's the one the case officer's looking for.
Councillor Sanderson, do you have any further comment?
I'm just reading it to see if it is in there. Right, okay.
Okay. So we're just going to pull the plan up again.
Excuse me, thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to see if I can zoom out a bit further on this at the moment. But this area of land here and this area here, the wording on the plan states that the land will be for either secondary school provision or residential development, and that plan is being conditioned as part of the information that's been submitted as part of this outline application. So when any reserve matters application comes forward in the future, that option is still there, and it also gives colleagues within education time to put their case forward for additional
My
schools.
concern, Chair, is because educational need is not mentioned in the conditions, I can see possibly a legal battle with the developer trying to wriggle out of it at some 2 years down the line.
Through you, Chair, we don't actually have a policy basis on which to require a condition requiring that secondary school. This is the most we can do on the basis that the safeguarding option has lapsed before Warwickshire County Council managed to secure that land. So this is better than nothing, but we don't have a planning policy basis on which to ask for anything further.
Obviously, I know that the secondary school issue is one that's attracted a great deal of attention, and that I suspect we're about to hear more about from Councillor Mrs Brown and then Councillor Rabin. My understanding is that our officers, not being education experts, cannot make a formal recommendation that a secondary school is needed. That needs to come from the county. Now, I would agree with you and with others that a secondary school is absolutely needed, but we cannot, as a planning authority, impose that because the Education Service have not yet said that this is necessary. Now, I think our officers can't make that recommendation. I think we as councillors certainly can make that recommendation, that they should do that, and our officers have managed to secure the opportunity for that to be done, is my understanding. So, Councillor Mrs Brown, then Councillor Rabin, then Councillor Shrivastava, then Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. It's knowing where to start on this one, really, isn't it? I agree with everything that's been said. It's the thing that I find difficult to come to terms with is that we've known for years that the sufficiency of secondary school places is just not there for this area of the town. So for county, and I speak as a county, as somebody who knows how the county council works from working there as well as being a county councillor, they will know the level of sufficiency in Rugby, and they will have been able to plan for that if they know their onions in a way that doesn't put the borough council in this compromising position. And I appreciate it. We are compromised on this as a borough council. We know what we want from it, and it's ludicrous to see children being shipped across town from the houses that exist there already, let alone when these additional ones are built. I worry about the state of infrastructure for this town and the number of houses that are going in. Anyway, education is a significant part of it, but it's not the only part of it. So I think the debate and the discussion should focus on what we can do as a borough council and as a planning committee to put some weight behind the argument towards county to say, look, this is what we know we need. The need for a secondary school there is just beyond dispute. I'm concerned about the criteria that will be used to determine whether or not a secondary school is needed there. You know, how can they possibly say it's not? And yet there still seems to be this ambivalence around whether it will be built or not. Are we sure that's the only reason behind this? Are we sure that sufficiency is the only reason behind this? Is it to do with some other kind of, I don't know, economic pressure, for example?
I'll have to assume that you're speaking rhetorically because I myself am not a county councillor.
It was just let me float this. I suppose it's more of a sort of a question in the air. But my concern is that the right decision will not be made for the right reasons.
Okay, we'll now come to Councillor Rabin.
Thank you, Chair. I agree again with what has been said so far in terms of the need for a secondary school. We've seen residents and colleagues within my ward. I have one sitting in front of me who is about to speak, and one who's made his voice known on the screen. I agree wholeheartedly with both of them and the colleagues in the room. And if we're not able to specify an educational facility on this particular document, I would suggest that we are able to at least stipulate that as a condition, the developers should not act or take any action in terms of using that land for residential purposes until the County Education Authority has made its conclusion. Surely that should be possible. And I have two other points to make, but not on this particular topic, so I could raise them now.
I think if you wish to continue speaking, Councillor Rabin, and we'll come back to you.
The other point I have to say is that looking at the plan, this is an absolutely excellent example of how a developer has actually taken into account the existing ancient hedgerows and has saved every one of them. If you look at the plan, every one of those hedgerows on the previous photograph, the overhead photograph, has had the hedgerows maintained and retained in the developer's plan. So they can do it. Why can't others do it? My last point relates to the access on Central Park Drive, which is particularly relevant. Now, ward members, colleagues, and residents, and indeed parents of the existing primary school at the end of that drive, are more than aware of the issues of HGV drivers using that particular location as overnight stays, And I'm personally aware, as is Councillor Ellis and Shrivastava, who have carried out a number of litter picks in the area, of the absolute significance of littering along that road on a weekly basis. Now, if we're suggesting that the development uses that as a main point of access, I would suggest, as a condition, adding to condition 35, that Central Park Drive have chicanes added and further construction to prevent HGV traffic parking along there overnight. HGV drivers have the facility now to park overnight with the new service station no more than 5 minutes down the road. If we're looking at increasing traffic load along that drive, we need to take away the HGV traffic. The only way I can see to do that is to extend the barriers on the pavements that are already there to prevent HGV parking, and also to look at chicanes to make that road safer, because it will be a death trap. Thank you, Chair.
Through you, Chair. That's something that can be looked at the reserve matter stage when the final layout comes forward and looked at with colleagues within the Highways Authority. We would obviously just need to make sure that it all works and is acceptable, because there'll be the potential for a bus route to be going through there in the future, so it's just to make sure it doesn't impact on anything like that, but it's something that we can put to them at reserve matters.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Sarah Chapman on your initial point regarding the education provision.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the school provision, I think we would struggle with a condition, but what we were just discussing is it might be appropriate to include it in the heads of terms of the planning obligation, to go back to the developers and see what agreement we might be able to reach around, you know, ongoing safeguarding that land. But it would be essentially a commercial negotiation between us and the developers to see whether they would agree that. That's probably the best route to try and achieve that.
Thank you. Because I think other committee members may testify that, and you may be able to confirm that where Holton was concerned, for instance, there was a similar stipulation that a school be built within the development. So there's in fact 2 schools. So there should be no reason why in this particular document we shouldn't do what you've just suggested.
The slight difference with Holton is we haven't actually had that formal request from our statutory counsel to use the education expert. That's not something Warwickshire County Council have asked us to include in either the conditions or the planning obligation. But what we can do is, based on the master plan and the 2 possible uses of that piece of land, is look to try and strengthen that in the planning obligation agreement. But that's subject to negotiation with the developer, but we can certainly include that in the heads of terms, and that's probably the strongest we can do, but we can certainly pursue that.
Thank you. And that's with Persimmon.
Through you, Chair. The developers, AC Lloyd,
AC
for
Lloyd.
this application.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I would certainly agree
I had
with...
some other speakers first, Councillor Sanderson.
Oh, sorry.
I think we had Councillor...
Didn't see any lights on.
I think we had Councillor Shrivastava, then Councillor Lewis, and then we'll come to yourself, Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much. I think it has been answered. Education is one of the infrastructure been talked about. There are 475 houses being built. There is shortage of secondary school places, as we know. Warwickshire County Council is one of the contacts. What the comment they make? Education obviously is a part of the Warwickshire County. What the comment they make about the educational needs, any developments?
Thank you, Chair. On this particular application, I've had numerous conversations and email exchanges with colleagues within education to try and get the information put forward before we got to this stage of the application, and going right up to the last minute to see whether there was a decision that could be made and see how they were progressing. But unfortunately, we couldn't get a firm decision from our colleagues over in education, which was why we had to negotiate the best possible solution moving forward with this in this application, so we don't lose the secondary school provision entirely, which policy-wise we would be at risk of doing at this stage.
Thank you. Anyway, it's good to make the conditions as we have discussed.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's quite interesting, is because 5 or 6 years ago, it was clear from work that the County Council had done and documents that they published that there was going to be a shortage of secondary school places in the north of Rugby. Of course, Rugby's split by the West Coast Main Line. And at that time, there was one secondary school north of the line, and I think there were 5 altogether in the south. And yet they chose to build an additional secondary school in the south, which is, I'm not complaining about the school, it's a good school. But it was a location, and that was, I believe, the reason they did that was because there was a piece of land there that they already owned that they could use to build the school on, and it totally ignored the projections and the present position at that time of the number of school places, secondary school places available. So and this situation arose regarding the reservation of this piece of land at that time, and I'm not convinced that the right reasons will be used to decide where a school goes. So anything we can do to protect that piece of land for the school is definitely needed, because it, even now, even more, I think the secondary school situation is such that it's needed in the north rather than the south. The other one thing I noticed in the document is an interesting comment by Stagecoach regarding the provision of bus services, where they said the relevance of this kind of service is really low, even to those who have no car at all. People will walk to a more frequent service, often a considerable distance, if they are essential users, but this is not desirable and certainly will not encourage any modal shift at all. So they don't seem to think that that they can get away from car use and use the buses instead. Some comments?
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the way that the condition, informative, whatever we want to call it, suggested by Sarah, is worth pursuing. What I don't get the developer not getting is a good secondary school provision in that area will make those homes much more attractive to purchasers, because that's what people look for. Good schools, good local facilities. It'll even make the buses better, because people, it will say to Stagecoach, yeah, there's going to be investment in the school, and there will be school runs and transport needed for those school runs. So there's having a secondary school in that area is a positive for both the community and the developer. So again, I'd like to hear what the words that Sarah is proposing is. But I would suggest, even if it's the county council being timid on making a expenditure commitment, but of course, as Councillor Lewis pointed out, there are such things as free schools, and a free school might want to look at that site.
It might indeed. I'm just going to bring in our Chief Officer, Nicola Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I'd just like to reiterate that I concur with the advice that you've been given this evening from Sarah in relation to the best way forward that the committee tonight can move on this in terms of amending the heads of terms as she's recommended. But what I'd also like to stress is that I've very much heard the strength of feeling tonight from members of this committee and how they and their feelings regarding secondary school provision on this site. And I just want to assure members of this committee that the planning team will continue to press Warwickshire County Council Education very hard on this matter to ensure that we explore every possible avenue to secure secondary school provision on this site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And I think I don't speak out of turn when I say you'll have the full support of the portfolio holder, Councillor Simpson-Vince, on this issue. I think, speaking for myself, I think it's fascinating that almost the entire debate this evening hasn't focused on the principle of development. It hasn't focused on whether this is the right place to deliver houses, or whether many of the other things covered within the Section 106 agreement are suitable, which I know that we have sometimes had a robust exchange of views on. So I think from that perspective, given that the sticking point appears to be something that, with the greatest will in the world, is not solely within the remit of us as a planning authority or our officers this evening, I am happy to move an amendment to the heads of terms as set out by our legal advisor, which I believe, if I've got my notes correct, would result in further safeguarding of the education land as part of the negotiation process, and then to go forward as reserved matters.
Happy to second that as cross-party.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Eccleston, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Chair. I support everything that's been said about the need for education, and we've talked long and hard about the requirement for secondary school in the north of the borough. The question I had actually is, has anybody done the pupil projections going forward? Has that been done? Has that been discussed with Warwickshire? And also, I also welcome the comment Councillor Arabian mentioned about the ideal situation here of the protection of the hedgerows, etc., with this proposed development. It's a pity we're going to lose some mature trees, but again, we're giving those up to the houses, and presumably that's something that can be addressed in the future. And just a final point, it's a fairly minor one, but it's a little niggly one for me. It's over 5 months now since Highways England changed its name to National Highways. Could we please amend our documents to refer to them as National Highways, please, not Highways England, because they don't exist anymore? Thank you.
I'm sure that will be taken into account by officers, that final point. Councillor Gillies?
Just one thing to bear in mind about the school situation is that there are quite a number of villages to the north of the borough that actually, at the moment, because of the lack of provision, have their children educated at secondary level over in Leicestershire. So that's something else we can put in the document.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gillies. So if there are no further comments, so we have an amendment to the heads of terms, which I'm happy to delegate to officers to draft the precise wording of, proposed by myself and seconded by Councillor Sanderson for approval. Can I ask all those in favour to raise their hands? I make that 11. All those against? So that is approved unanimously. As a final point on that subject, if anyone wants to send the recording of this to Warwickshire County Council, I think we can send them the entire meeting at this stage. So we'll now come to the final application for this evening, which is R21/0176, Victoria House, 50 Albert Street.
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt briefly? I did make a point regarding adding an amendment to the condition 35 relating to the road access.
I believe, as the officer said, that would be looked at as part of the reserved matters stage, but that has been noted by officers.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, over to you.
This application is for an extension of temporary permission R18-1478 for a further 3 years for a temporary change of use from a car sales forecourt, car workshop and car sales office use class sui generis to an office with associated car parking, storage and distribution use class E for a period of 3 years. This planning application is referred to Planning Committee for determination in accordance with the scheme of delegation because the application has been submitted by the Council. The application site is noted by the red X on the map located within the defined town centre boundary as shown by the black outline. The site is approximately 0.28 hectares in area and comprises of a 3-storey office building, a single-storey building attached to the office building to the south and a standalone single-storey building in the southwest corner of the site, and the rest of the site comprises of hard standing. Vehicle access is achieved via Albert Street. Here we have some site photos taken on the site visit. The first photo shows the view of the site from Albert Street, standing close to the northwest corner of the site. The second photo shows an area of hard standing, which is used for vehicle parking, which is located in the northeast corner of the site by the office building. The third photo shows the view of the office building taken from the northeast corner of the site. Here we have some more photos, and the first photo shows the standalone single-storey building in the southwest corner of the site and an area of hard standing. The second photo shows the attached single-storey building to the office building, and finally we have a photo showing the view of the site from Albert Square. In terms of the proposed areas of use, the site comprises of a 3-storey office building, a standalone single-storey building in the southwest corner site, and an attached single-storey building to the office building. It's proposed that the use areas of these continue as approved from the 2 previous applications in 2015 and 2018. The office will be used for the administration and coordination of the property repairs service and will be also used for staff meetings and training. The attached building and the standalone single-storey building will continue to be used primarily for storage and distribution of materials and equipment, including power tools associated with the service. In terms of key issues, the site is situated within the town centre boundary, but not within the primary shopping area, the primary shopping frontages, or the secondary shopping frontage classifications. A flexible approach is taken here, and office space is therefore acceptable in this area. The use on the site will continue to not harm the retail function, character, vitality and viability of the primary shopping area, and is therefore in accordance with the policies ET2, TC1 and TC3 in the local plan. In terms of the impact on residential amenity, hours of opening condition is proposed in line with Environmental Health's recommendation. This will restrict the opening hours as shown on the screen and will protect the amenities of the residential properties nearby. In terms of other matters, there's no change to the design and appearance of the site, as there's no alterations proposed. There's been no objection from highways in terms of highway safety and parking, and therefore no issues have been raised. In terms of air quality, there's no new floor spaces, and therefore this is fine. We had one complaint from the Hanover Gardens Resident Management Committee, and it's been advised that the containers on site are, if they are required, then a permanent solution needs to be considered, and they should enter consultation with this to resolve this issue. In terms of planning balance, the temporary use of the site is appropriate in this location and will not have an adverse impact on the vitality and viability of the primary shopping area. The continued use on the site enables the site to be occupied and will continue to provide employment opportunities to the area. There are no highway or parking concerns that would impact highway safety and operation. The application complies with the local plan and MPPF, and therefore is the officer's recommendation that the application is approved subject to conditions outlined in the officer report.
Thank you very much, Ewan. So I had Councillor Eccleston first, then Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's pretty straightforward, really. It's already in use. We're looking for an extension, and I move approval.
you, Councillor Eccleston. Councillor Sanderson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I saw the comments from the Hanover Garden Residents Management Committee, and I went down and had a look myself. I can see what they're complaining about. At the back of the containers, there are a large number of used and half-used large tubs of paint and other materials, which are not screened off from public view in terms of the amenity. If you look next door at the old Albert Street DHS offices, they've actually screened their area off. And it's probably a little bit tougher on those who ought to know better, i.e. those who work for a local authority. Surely those paint cans, tins, bits of material should all be screened off from public view to tidy the site up.
Through you, Chair, I can certainly advise the applicants, but this application only deals with the temporary change of use of the land rather than the container issue.
Sorry, could you speak up? I'm not that good.
This application only deals with the temporary change of use of the land, and I can advise the property repair service to make the area look better if that's requested.
So we could put an informative asking them to tidy up their area?
Yeah.
That's what I'm after, Chair.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Councillor Srivastava?
I think as Hanover Gardens, I know some residents. They've got a lot of problem with the parking issues. So any assessment on the Warwickshire County Council traffic management on this? What it will create?
The site has 30 spaces and they have no problems with the parking, and they've raised no objections to this issue.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Ms Watson-Merritt?
Thank you, Chair. I think on the Hanover Gardens comment, I think it's very useful, and for the next 3 years, to consider the neighbourliness. I use that car park rented from Rugby Borough Council, and I walk past there almost on a daily basis. Could we find out what time the unit opens so that people, workers can have access to those storage containers? I know that there's a great big lever, and when they open it, I've heard the noise it makes. Obviously, 9 o'clock's a feasible time to start work. 8:30 might be a better time, well, those for office use, but obviously for people who access these containers, they need to get there long before work starts at 9 o'clock. So what is a reasonable hour, given that, is that site accessible? So even though it's maybe not a planning matter, can we just be a bit more neighbourly about this?
Yeah, so Environmental Health have proposed that a condition is attached that would restrict the opening of the site to 8 o'clock, which is considered neighbourly.
Okay, thank you.
I think the full condition is condition 4. I know Councillor Lewis had his hand up. I just want to go back to Councillor Sanderson. Were you formally moving an informative?
I'll formally move the informative to cover the points that we've raised, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Question comes to mind, actually. I realise the site is an extremely useful one for the council. Does the council's presence there prevent an even more useful use of the site by any other organisations? And then I'll second Councillor Sanderson's proposal.
I think we can only take planning applications as they come forward. So hypothetically, yes, but until a planning application comes forward, I don't think so.
Thank you very much. I didn't expect an answer to that.
Always happy to try and help. Okay, so we've got an amendment. Sorry, we had a proposal for approval as set out in the officer's report from Councillor Eccleston. Are you still wishing to move that?
I'm happy to go with the amendment, actually, with Councillor Sanderson.
Okay, so we'll then come to the motion as amended by Councillor Sanderson with an informative that you're happy for officers to draft?
The officers draft, and it's about the condition of the site.
Okay, and that's been moved by yourself and seconded by Councillor Lewis. Councillor Gillies.
Just a point to note, Chair, and that is that the workers that work out from that depot, you know, they like to finish fairly early. You know, they're probably getting back there about 4:30, but they like to also start early, you see. So someone's got to open up that premises so that they can start at a sensible time. I mean, to restrict it to opening up at 8 o'clock means that the guys that are working out of there aren't getting away till at the earliest 8:30, because they've got to get the jobs organised for the day, you see. So it's most unusual because, you know, county council workers do like to get cracking early.
I'd just like to point out this is the same condition that was applied in the 2015 and 2018 applications, so it has worked for the last 6 years and nothing has changed from that.
Yeah, just to come back, that I know the site extremely well, and I probably ought to make another admission that I do some work for the residents at Hanover Gardens. And normally when there's things that are really, really bad, they give me a bending of the ear. And they haven't said anything to me on this occasion. So apart from the fact that we've already agreed through the planning department that there's going to be negotiations between the use of the site and the Residents Association, I'm quite happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gillis. So if there are no further comments on this application, then we have a approval with an informative to be drafted by the officers regarding the maintenance of the site from Councillor Sanderson, seconded by Councillor Lewis. All those in favour, can I ask them to show their hands? I make that 11. Any against? No. So that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. So those are the applications for consideration this evening. We now come to agenda item 5, which is advance notice of site visits. Richard, are there any?
I've had no further requests, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And agenda item 6, which is delegated decisions to note. Okay. That concludes the business of the Planning Committee this evening. I'd just like to thank all the officers